In Acts chapter 8, we read about the first wave of major persecution against the early Christians. The Sanhedrin had arrested Stephen and unjustly stoned him to death. After this, a young man named Saul was given authority by the Sanhedrin to begin persecuting Christians. Saul began to wreak havoc among the church, entering homes and dragging off men and women to prison for their faith in Jesus. Because of this persecution, the Christians were forced out of Jerusalem, and they began scattering everywhere. Everywhere they went, they preached this good news of Jesus Christ. The preaching of the gospel was accompanied by signs and wonders, and many people believed. One of the young leaders who had been appointed along with Stephen was Philip. Philip went to Samaria, where God validated the preaching of the gospel with great signs and wonders. We read that the people in Samaria joyfully received the gospel and were saved. We can recall that Jesus had earlier told his disciples in Acts chapter 1, prior to his ascension, "And you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." Now, because of the persecution of Christians instigated by Saul and the Sanhedrin, the early believers began to scatter everywhere, bringing the message of the gospel with them. So we see how Jesus' words began to be fulfilled. Saul and the unbelieving Jewish leadership sought to destroy the Christian faith, but God was able to even work this for heaven's purposes. We need to realize this principle in our own lives. When we as believers entrust the direction of our lives toward heaven's purposes, we can be sure that God, in His perfect ways and in His perfect timing, will bring His own purposes to pass in our lives. You may encounter resistance in your faith. Perhaps people or circumstances may seem to attempt to interfere with God's purposes in your life. But realize that in the big picture, nothing can thwart God's purposes when we fully entrust our lives to Him.